You Ray?
Gardner turned that off.
What's up, Stewart?
Man, what's up?
Welcome back, everyone. It's Charlie. Lanterns Episode 3 dropped a new trailer with a clip of Guy Gardner coming to see John Stewart, who's been locked up in the Rushville County prison, inside the Sheriff's Department's prison. So we will break it all down because there's a lot of questions about what's happening with the timeline here. When did Guy Gardner get the ring exactly? What's happening with that body that's pretending to be Hal Jordan during Episode 1 in the 2026 timeline? What's going on here in this scene? Because I do think we have evidence now that that body that we saw at the end of Episode 1, much better evidence that that was not actually the real Hal Jordan. Guy Gardner and his spectacular haircut have arrived in Rushville to try and annoy John Stewart as much as possible. During the new clip, they play this like Guy Gardner is coming in to rescue, technically save, John Stewart from prison, bail him out of prison, with a couple funny jokes, like he sits down and says, "Hey, you ready, Stewart? Sup, sup." They're on a bro basis, but like they're not best friends for life or anything like that. They seem like they're cordial, like they're friends. They're members of the same platoon because they're both members of the Green Lantern Corps, technically, even though it seems like John Stewart doesn't have a ring during this 2026 part of the timeline. There's still a lot of questions about why he does not have the ring yet, why he didn't have Hal's ring yet, and he didn't find it on that body that looks like Hal at the end of Episode 1. But if it wasn't clear when this clip is happening in the timeline exactly, it's happening in 2026 because you know of John Stewart's beard. The beard helps you track the timeline. Beard watch. I think this is connected to the scene in the earlier trailers that we saw where John Stewart lights up the Green Lantern signal like the bat signal for Guy Gardner, and it calls him here, and it's after he gets in the fight with Billy Macon, Macon's son, and his goons. My assumption is this is set after he comes back to town and finds the body that looks like Hal Jordan. So this is probably with John Stewart trying to figure out what has happened and what's going on with that body there. It's just like continuing forward from that timeline. The brand new evidence that that body that we saw was not Hal Jordan now confirmed, I think, because of what happened during Episode 2. So Hal Jordan goes to the city morgue and he finds all the aliens that were from the same race as Anton. I think it's pronounced Anton. They did during the official podcast, even though it's spelled like Antan.
There was a time of chaos in the galaxy. Then the Manhunters came.
The person that everybody now thinks is actually Atrocitus, and they are from Sector 666, which was wiped out by the Manhunters, and that's why they want revenge against the Manhunter here in town. Hal Jordan finds their bodies in the city morgue, and you notice that their alien bodies have not reverted to their alien state. They still bleed alien blood, like the goo comes out of them, but their bodies look like aliens. So I think we can take this as confirmation that that body that we saw that looked like Hal Jordan in the stands at the end of Episode 1 in 2026 is not actually Hal Jordan. It's just another alien that made itself look like Hal Jordan for some reason. We still don't know why it did that, like big question mark, but I think it just confirms that Hal Jordan is still alive in 2026. So they did not actually kill Hal Jordan off. That was probably one of the most controversial things going into this. There were like so many hardcore Green Lantern Hal Jordan fans that were so upset, like getting so pissed off when they thought that they might be killing Hal Jordan off Ned Stark, Game of Thrones style. It is an HBO show, so they do want to go for the twist, but this is sort of like them having their cake and eating it too. Like a bigger twist is that it's not actually Hal Jordan and he's still secretly alive. Connected to this Guy Gardner clip with him showing up like after he's been a Green Lantern for a couple years now, because remember, the first Superman movie happens in 2025, and he's been a Green Lantern. He's had his ring for a little while at that point, meaning that he gets it sometime between 2016, the timeline on the show, and 2025, but not exactly clear what year it was. During the official podcast for Episode 1, Tom King said something that made it sound like Hal Jordan's ring actually went to Guy Gardner, not to John Stewart, and that's why John Stewart didn't have the ring in 2026. The only problem with that is that the timeline doesn't work out unless that happened a couple years prior to that, because Guy Gardner had already had the ring for a couple years when the first Superman movie happened. So that's why people were taking that to mean maybe he was talking about something else and not Guy Gardner literally getting Hal Jordan's ring. Also, when you look at the ring replicas that DC is selling, the official versions of the rings, their rings look nothing alike, so it looks like Guy Gardner gets a completely separate Green Lantern ring than Hal Jordan.
There was like a hidden mystery in the middle. Like
Yeah.
Guy Gardner was Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And that was a mystery. Because
Like, how do we get there?
Why? How did we get there? Because at the end of this episode, Hal's dead, but also you see John's hand. He's not wearing that ring. Guy has the ring. So why does Guy end up with the ring, and where do we go after this? Because this moves us forward.
But I think episode 3 is going to answer a couple questions as to when exactly Guy Gardner got his Green Lantern ring, why he got his ring, and I think what they're setting up is the idea that the Guardians actually went to Guy Gardner because he was a better candidate that they wanted. They wanted to give him the ring, as opposed to John Stewart, who was supposed to get Hal Jordan's ring when he died, but he hasn't actually died yet. And because of that new Sinestro scene where he talks about the power of fear, I think they are definitely setting up the Hal Jordan parallax twist in Sinestro getting his yellow ring and starting the Sinestro Corps so that the War of Light slowly gets seeded into the DCU. And in the future, at some point, like future years, they can actually do a War of Light movie at some point. It is totally possible that we see some of the other Lantern Corps during the series too, like if they do confirm if Anton, however you want to pronounce his name, is from Sector 666 and he's really a version of Atrocitus, and we're actually looking at what will become the Red Lanterns. There are many other colors in the emotional spectrum, so we'll see how far they take revealing all those different emotional spectrum core at the end of the season. My early assumption is that just a little too much story for them to completely dig into every single different core from the emotional spectrum. But at least teasing the idea that Sinestro gets his yellow ring and Hal's infused with the spirit of Parallax. The way they've talked about the show and sort of setting up the future of the DCU, it is meant to do a lot of cosmic world building, and it is meant to set up John Stewart to go to the Man of Tomorrow movie, and he'll probably be a Green Lantern with a ring by the time that happens. I believe that movie is meant to take place in the DCU of 2027 because James Gunn says that the movie is meant to move in real time. So because the Man of Tomorrow movie comes out in 2027, it takes place in 2027 of the DCU. I do not think they're going to kill off Guy Gardner Green Lantern. I think they'll keep him around just because Nathan Fillion is such good friends with James Gunn, and he just likes using his character for so much comedy in scenes like this. Nathan Fillion is also just such a great actor that you don't want to get rid of that. You want to keep him around as long as possible so you can use him for anything that you possibly might need. Be it comedy, be it drama. And when it comes to Lantern Season 2 and setting that up, they said that the story of this season is meant to be start, middle, and finish, and they will conclude the story, what happened to Hal Jordan, what happens with Sinestro, what happens with them setting up Man of Tomorrow. Like, that'll all wrap up in the finale, but they'll also seed a couple things that they can use for plot in Season 2, but Season 2 would be a completely separate arc, and they make it sound like it might even be like an anthology type of show following a different group of characters, but also, yes, Jon Stewart too. And I think that's one of the reasons why they decided to stay with the Lanterns title instead of saying Green Lantern, so that they can do lanterns of other colors of the emotional spectrum. Like they can follow yellow lanterns, they can follow red lanterns. They actually said that in response to people's complaints that they didn't call the show Green Lantern. Like, why are you just calling it Lanterns? You're doing the Arrow thing. When they did Arrow, they didn't call it Green Arrow. They called it Arrow because they wanted it to sound more down and dirty and hardcore.
You have failed this.
Damon Lindelof and the other people that made the show, like James Gunn, said, well, yeah, we're going to be following a whole bunch of different kinds of lanterns eventually, so we just decided to call it the more generic lanterns because it applied to all different kinds of lanterns, not just Green Lanterns. Most of Episode 3 seems like it's meant to be a heavy Jon Stewart backstory explainer, but it does look like we'll get some more of the 2026 timeline after he finds Hal's body, after he comes back to town. I also love the idea that Guy Gardner stole the idea for his Green Lantern light, his Green Lantern signal, from Batman in Gotham with the Bat Signal, because he, like probably everybody else in this universe, thinks the Batman is a total badass. Guy Gardner thinks of himself extremely highly, and he's not above stealing cool ideas from other superheroes around this world. They even did this bit on the Flash TV show with Grant Gustin back in the day during Season 2 when they had Edge on. It was actually a really funny moment where he said he got this idea from someone else, like Cisco comes up with the idea to create the flashlight. But that's also the other joke in that case too. They use the wordplay, it's a flash light, as in flashlight. And it also seems like Episode 3 will be dedicated to continuing that conversation between Hal Jordan and Sinestro in the 2016 timeline after he goes to visit him in his space prison. One of the funny things they said about Ulrich Thompson's version of Sinestro is that he's kind of trying to bait Hal Jordan a little bit when he says, tell me about Jon Stewart, because he knows what he needs to say to get Hal Jordan talking more, because he both doesn't get that many visitors in his space prison. He likes having actual visitors, but he's also trying to find a way out. It seems like he's trying to get Hal to eventually help him break out of prison. And the writer said that the Guardians of Oa are actually afraid of something like this maybe happening, that Sinestro's ideas have rubbed off on Hal Jordan because he was his mentor for so long. Maybe we'll get some more flashbacks to those scenes too to see Sinestro actually rebelling against the Guardians. There were a couple scenes in the previous trailers where you see him in his uniform, his Green Lantern suit, screaming at Hal Jordan a little bit, like something crazy is going on, and it seems like it's in the middle of that going down. Originally in the comics, the reason why Sinestro rebels against the Guardians in the first place is because he learns about the secret passages in the Book of Oa that talk about the other emotional spectrum Lantern core, like all the other power that can be wielded from the rest of the emotional spectrum, not just from Green. One of the really big sins of the Guardians of Oa is that they hid parts of the Book of Oa that talked about the prophecy of the Blackest Night because they were so worried about it. It also spoke about the rest of the emotional spectrum and Volthoom, who taught them that they could wield the emotional spectrum in the first place. So this is crazy prophecy of Blackest Night and all this bad history that the Guardians don't want anybody learning about because they're so worried that things might go off the rails and that might turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy and lead to the actual war itself happening, the War of Light in Blackest Night actually happening.
Hey, wait! That's not a dummy!
This exhibit is closed.
But it winds up turning into a bit of a Streisand effect. Sinestro learns about it, then he rebels against them and decides that fear is actually the strongest force in the universe, which he's talking to Hal Jordan about in one of the trailers for episode 3. So I also think that's one of the reasons why in the title, like the opening intro for the Lantern series, you see the light yellow inside his lantern ring radiating out until it turns into his green ring. So it all starts with yellow fear. And they're just trying to tease the idea that eventually Hal Jordan will succumb to fear, giving us all the Hal Jordan parallax arcs from the comics. There was also that moment early in the series where Sheriff Carey says that Hal Jordan isn't fearless, he's just trying to avoid fear by living alone, living a solitary life this whole time, and it's the loneliest thing, saddest thing that she's ever seen in her entire life. Just setting up the idea that he also is trying to start this relationship with her in the 2016 timeline where he just seems like he's horny on main for her. So early theory over the 2016 part of the timeline is he slowly falls in love with her, he slowly begins to succumb to fear, with all those conversations he has with Sinestro in the 2016 timeline, where Sinestro sort of worms that into his brain and just get him to slowly succumb to fear eventually too. They've also heavily established on the show that Hal Jordan does not trust the Guardians for a number of different reasons. What went down with Sinestro and what seems like it happened in present day, he stopped backing his ring up in 2006, which makes it sound that that's around the time where Sinestro rebelled against the Guardians. So maybe they're also setting up the idea that Hal Jordan also rebels against the Guardians. That's when he has his big turn. Maybe not necessarily a heel turn, but it depends on how you look at it, what you think is actually going to wind up happening, because in the comics, they played the Hal Jordan parallax twist as a big heel turn, but on the show, they want to make it seem like the Guardians are way shadier than Sinestro, who is a villain in the comics. I also definitely think that Sinestro, as cool as a cucumber as he seems right now, will definitely do some hardcore stuff in the back half of the season. Like, he will definitely show some of his true colors, so to speak, make all the Green Lantern and Lanterns puns possible. But I cannot wait to see Nathan Fillion and Guy Gardner show up and just ham things up with Jon Stewart, because Jon Stewart seems like he probably can't stand his antics. Everybody post all your reactions in the comments below and all your theories about when Guy Gardner got his ring exactly. I also just did a Lanterns Batman video for all the different Batman and Gotham mentions that they've had on the show so far. There are many, it seems like they're doing it almost every single episode, setting up this new version of Batman. I'll put a link for that video down in the description below. My full episode 3 video will post on Sunday night after they release it, so be sure to enable alerts for my channel so you don't miss that. Everybody click here for that episode. I'll update the link as soon as I post it, and click here for all my other Lanterns episodes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.